So once again, this may be a little bit of a filler video, but one that I feel could actually be valuable before reading Chainsaw Man Part 2. And there's a good reason for this, right? You see, Tatsuki Fujimoto, the author of Chainsaw Man and Fire Punch, before even having those series and putting them in motion, he had a couple of one-shots, I believe 3 in total. And one of those one-shots was back in 2014, 2015, hell, maybe even 2016, but one of those years. And it was known as Yogen no Nayuta. Now, this one shot that preceded both Fire Punch and Chainsaw Man actually gives us a bit of insight on potentially what to expect for Chainsaw Man Part 2 in terms of a relationship, character dynamic, and what I think is where he's somewhat pulling the story from, or at least the direction that he wants to go down in terms of Denji and Nayuta's relationship. There's a couple of reasons for this. First and foremost, the Nayuta one-shot obviously has Nayuta as a character. They are a little bit different in terms of design. Personality-wise, there's even a couple of similarities there. They're not entirely the same, but he has definitely taken that character, transformed it, and reconstructed it to make it fit within Chainsaw Man Part 2 and at the end of Chainsaw Man. On top of that, the one-shot also implements a relationship between Nayuta and her older brother, Kenji. Obviously, that name being a predecessor to Denji. So what is this one-shot? Why should you read it before Chainsaw Man Part 2? Other than all the stuff that I have mentioned, I think it does give you a very early insight on Fujimoto's individuality, is what he likes to call it, his aesthetic, his mindset, the thought process that goes into his artwork, into his storytelling, and his manga specifically. At this time, it was very raw and not as polished as Fire Punch or Chainsaw Man, so you can see the very early stages and the pre-conceptualized versions of them, which to me is genuinely rather fascinating, seeing the building blocks of one's creativity and what they want and how they want to tell a story, what emotions they want to bring across, what quirky concepts or themes or dynamics / relationships do they want to play upon, and how do they want that to be perceived. Fire Punch was easily the first polished version of Fujimoto's aesthetic, and then from there he went to polish it even further and diversify it even further within Chainsaw Man. Now that Chainsaw Man Part 2 is going to a completely different magazine, and Fujimoto himself stating that he wants to change the interpretation of the story, he wants it to feel different. He's obviously evolving once again, trying to polish his own concepts, his own themes and dynamics, and to creatively birth something new, which once again is always impressive to see. To help this flow a little bit easier, a quick synopsis of this one shot sounds something like this. We follow two different characters, Kenji and Nayuta, and Kenji being the older brother, Nayuta being the younger sister. Now, Nayuta was born into the world with a lot of misery and tragedy surrounding her. She's not a normal girl, kind of viewed by the public as being the devil reincarnate, someone that will bring the end of times upon them. So since a very young age, there has been a litany of people that have wished and wanted death upon her. This also encapsulates the family that surrounds Nayuta, which consists of Kenji, her older brother, but also their father, who actually gets killed because of the scared nature that these humans have towards Nayuta, even though she hasn't necessarily done anything as of yet, even though they know she has some portional abilities which are pretty normalized within this one shot. They're still scared of what she could potentially produce in the future, so they actually go their own way about it to try and kill Nayuta, or at least send a message, which results in the death of their father. Because of this, Kenji takes the primary adult role, drops out of school, he gets multiple different jobs to try and supply the lifestyle of Nayuta, who is pretty simplistic. She doesn't necessarily talk, but when she does, it's in some very vague and thematic sense. Every word that she says has something to do with death, destruction, or tragedy. So obviously people are already scared. Not to mention that she has horns on top of her head, her eyes are completely circular, very similar or exactly the same as Makima, and she kills animals, progressively killing these animals from smaller going up to larger, to the point where she actually kills cattle. This would be kind of the changing point within this one shot, as she completely obliterates all of these cattle, and the response from the farmers that own them come to Kenji and saying that if you don't do anything about this, we're going to take it into our own own hands. So Kenji starts to work for multiple different people, free of charge, as much as he's trying to supply a lifestyle and food for Nayuta, because she's very hungry all of the time. He genuinely misses out on food himself. He supplies his own portion of food for Nayuta, which slightly redirects back into the reason why she kills so many animals to try and feed Kenji. It's very animalistic, very similar to a wild cat, which is actually what she represents portionally. She does meow vocally, which is kind of funny to see, but the way she acts, the way she treats animals, and how she brings it back to her place of comfort, her home, to give to Kenji, is directly connected to that. However, this doesn't last for all too long, as Kenji gets pretty horrifically beaten up, not necessarily on death's door, but enough to genuinely get Nayuta upset. She's still a very simplistic child at the end of the day, and as much as she doesn't really show emotions all too often, this sets her off. And because of all of these people that genuinely hate her and want her dead, but won't do anything about it because of the actions they took against their innocent father, they want to try and kill her with the law. They won't touch her physically. They won't try to brutally massacre her because obviously she is a young child. So she takes this anger after seeing Kenji come home with these horrific injuries and takes it out on the world, spawning these swords, which is what her ability is indicative to. And she starts to destroy everything, but within this destruction, it is extremely calculated. There is no death towards innocent people. She doesn't directly attack people. If anything, she just showcases her power in the most horrific way possible to remind them at any moment, if she really wanted to, she could kill everyone here. She could bring forth the destruction of the world. So while she's starting to go out of control and the military gets involved, planning to even kill her, Kenji comes back into the picture. And there's this somewhat mainline emotional narrative that takes place from start to finish, where Kenji doesn't really know how to feel about his sister. He questions himself on whether or not he should be scared or not. Should they just move away? Should he be more supportive? He questions a lot of different things about how to raise her. He is not a parent himself. He is very young, probably being anywhere between 14 to 16, but at this specific point, he has clarity. He manages to find Nayuta and he scolds her. In front of everyone, he actually slaps her, which brings her back to reality, snaps out of the anger completely, and for the first time throughout the entire one-shot, you see genuine emotion. She starts to cry like a child. It's kind of like Kenji had to pass a hurdle of his own suspicion, his own scared nature surrounding his sister. He was scared to punish her or talk back against her because of the power that she upholds, because of the weirdness that surrounds her. But then he started to realize why she was bringing in all these animals, because she recognized that he wasn't eating, that he was giving his portion of food to her. He also learns that she was learning how to read and write and talk. Even though she doesn't have any sort of conversations within the one shot and talks in weird, thematically tragic or destructive terms, she can write, and she continues to express herself through writing. They end off the one shot with Kenji and Nayuta leaving, going to a very secluded place where no one else could get hurt, where it's just her and him, to hopefully put her within a better environment, to teach her, to make her learn new things, and for them to grow and be in the safety of their own comfort, their own relationship, their own environment. For the most part, the Nayuta one-shot is very simple. It's a very quick read. I'd highly recommend going through it. But what this does for me is that I feel like Fujimoto is going to take this one-shot and basically use it as the very core of Chainsaw Man Part 2. The Kenji and Nayuta relationship, I think, is going to be identical to what Denji and Nayuta is building right now. We've seen the birth of their beautiful relationship at the end of Chainsaw Man. Nayuta being the brand new control devil and potentially being hated by many different people because of the power that she upholds. She's very simplistic in design, doesn't really know how to talk all too much, and so she needs to learn. She needs to find comfort and compassion and love, which is something that Denji does and doesn't have, which is a learning point for him. He is not mentally, emotionally, or even physically built to be in the position of being an adult, to caring for another individual like a little sister. But when we see him at the end of Chainsaw Man, we see that growth shine through, that he is taking those very big steps into becoming someone that can look after a younger sibling, even though he had none of his own, even though he was treated as a younger sibling, even though he's been mentally, emotionally, and physically abused his entire life, on top of being manipulated and used throughout the entire story. He shows this brand new compassion for Nayuta, someone that he does not know, but probably quite easily sees a reflection of his younger self within her. Knowing that Chainsaw Man Part 2 is most likely going to follow these two, their relationship, how they grow, and the difficulties that they will face alongside a school setting for Denji, pretty much leads me back to that one shot, that this is going to be a more evolved, in-depth version within the Chainsaw Man universe of that Nayuta one shot, which I couldn't be more excited for. It's a very interesting dynamic. There's a lot of ways that it can be played upon, and considering Chainsaw Man Part 2 is going to feel different to Chainsaw Man, there's a chance it's going to be playing on some very authentic or realistic themes, dynamics, or relationships. Knowing where Denji comes from, how he was raised, how that will be a reflection to what he went through within Chainsaw Man, and how it will reiterate and rotate around his understanding towards Nayuta, how to raise her, the best ways to show her compassion, how to basically respectfully build her up into an incredible person, a thriving individual. When he himself has experienced so much hardship, trying to avoid something similar happening to Nayuta at all cost is going to be a pretty big drive for him. And this is just the core. This isn't even mentioning everything else that surrounds Chainsaw Man Part 2 and what potentially could be within the story. When you think about how chaotic Chainsaw Man is, it's very easy to gloss over the harsh reality underneath everything, which is completely understandable. But if you do end up appreciating the experience and going back and reading specific things, going back and indulging within these characters, how they talk, how they act, what type of facial expressions they give, how nervous they get, there's so many different stories underneath the main story. There's so many different emotions that Fujimoto loves to showcase. Even though it's not in the most obvious of ways, it is ones that are definitely there. He's been doing it since Fire Punch. He even done it in the Nayuta one shot, and obviously within Chainsaw Man. So Chainsaw Man Part 2 is probably going to go down that exact same route, and I couldn't be more excited for it. So with that being said, that is basically it. If you have read the Nayuta one shot, I'd like to know what you thought about it, or even if you're interested in reading it after I've just talked about it. As simplistic as it is, I think it's a good way to gauge what to expect from Chainsaw Man Part 2. The relationship between Kenji and Nayuta, I assume is going to be the same as Denji and Nayuta. There's a lot of different things that obviously Fujimoto can add to it, and that comes with his more polished individuality and uniqueness that he upholds, which I'm extremely curious on how he evolves it even further. So I would love to hear your thoughts. But I want to thank you all for watching. Hope you enjoyed. Drink plenty of water. New video every 3 days, and I will see you within the next one. Goodbye.